Hey guys, welcome back. Behavior Strategies for Class. Today is our monthly chat with Andrew Smith, the behavior extraordinaire. He is a behavior coach and tutor and facilitator, mental health professional who does amazing work in his school district. And we are honored to have him with us, sharing his expertise as we are going to dive into some warning signs that you could look for in your students that may signify some other serious issues going on with your students. And then what can you do about them? So this is what we're going to dive in today. So don't miss out. We're going to talk about sudden changes in behaviors and how that goes across the whole line of, it could be social, academic, emotional, and of course, in their behaviors. So listen in today. You're going to get a lot of great information and Andrew's expertise, and he has a lot of information out for you that can help you as well, that will be in the show notes. So you won't want to miss this episode. Again, we're going to talk about warning signs in your students' behaviors so that you know when to truly get some more help for them. Welcome to Behavior Strategies for Class. I am Diane Bachman, your behavior paraprofessional with over 15 years of experience working in special education. And I'm so glad you're here because I'll be teaching you about social emotional learning, behavior strategies, trauma-informed care, and more. So if you are tired of being frustrated and not knowing what to do with your students who have challenging and disruptive behavior, you're in the right place. Now, if you're ready to become more equipped to help your students learn and grow, let's listen in to today's episode. And don't forget, before we get started, to hit that subscribe button, share this episode with other educators, and share the podcast with others as well so that we can get the word out to help students succeed and to continue to empower educators, all of you, to work with those students who have challenging behaviors, because you are not alone. We are all in this together, and I want to be able to encourage you and give you some guidance in working with those students because there is hope. So, identifying some warning signs. I am not going to give too much more intro because this is a longer episode and I don't want to take away from that, because I have seen lots of different changes in different students, and most of the time there is an underlying issue. And that truly is the importance of this podcast, is that there are underlying issues to your students' sudden changes. And we just want you to be aware so that you can get the help they need as much as possible. And you can hear them so that they don't feel like they are alone as well. So enough of that. I want to get into it because, like I said, this is a longer episode, but I don't want you to miss any of it because there is a ton of great knowledge to be learned here today. Hey guys, welcome back. Behavior Strategies for Class. And this is our monthly chat with Andrew, our behavior guru. You're going to be a guru now. I know.
I think that's a
So,
step up, right?
yeah. So today we're going to be talking about kind of a more serious subject. And what are some warning signs that you can look for and identify in your students when you see that they are going to be like serious problems, behavior problems, academics? There's all kinds of different warning signs. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. And then what can you do about them? So, Andrew, let's start off. What is one academic warning sign that you could see in your students that should be like, something's off here?
I will always say, just kind of the theme of what we always talk about is connect with your students so you get to know them
Right.
as best as you can, right? So
Exactly.
first off, first step, connection, it's the best prevention, right? I mean that I get that's nice little ring to it, like quoting, you could quote me on that one. Connection's always the best prevention.
Oh, I like that
Um,
one.
but one of the biggest parts is attendance and performance. Now, knowing your kids then kind of some of the different things. Are they showing up? Do you have just a ton of it missed or absence, even if there is some excused ones, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Talking just mainly to the academic crowd here. Um, Even then, that gives you kind of a hint about some things that are going on. Is there some medical things maybe? Because the hard part is that everybody's trying to do their best. I totally believe everybody wants to do their best,
Right.
That's that humanistic side to me and to the just how I look at things. But not everybody knows to communicate with the teachers or to the school. Not everybody
True.
has that open conduit or has had that like good experience, or even some of the schools aren't as welcoming as they could be. So,
True.
trying to just kind of know what's going on with the kiddos, because when you're seeing so many, and this was a thing that happened with COVID, was for so long that we were like, you know, we're not excusing you. You go home, you do you take care of yourself, come back when you're feeling good and you're not gonna expose the rest of us to something, right?
Right.
But that's where our gap really grew. And so now there's kind of that whiplash of like swinging back of like trying to
Right.
get kids back in so that they can have the exposure. So I would say attendance is one big one. Um, are they usually a punctual kid? Is that somebody who's consistently tardy for some reason? Those can be big warning signs there. And especially when you're adolescents or your older kids, excuse me,
Mm,
middle school and high school, are they
right.
frequently late? Are they frequently, when they get there, they just seem disheveled, things like that. Is there always an excuse? Do they have a job outside that they need to? Those are those things um, that can be warning signs. And then performance. Has their performance changed? Have you
Hmm.
seen a gradual decline or a sharp turnaround, like a 180? Like your A student is suddenly bombing, not giving a crap, giving you the double
Hmm.
birds and walking out of that room. That's kind of a sign something's going on. Um, and that happens. I would say those are the more apparent ones, but do you have that student who just kind of flies under the radar and doesn't make too many waves? That one who consistently has that C or low B. Those are the ones that I like to kind of start trying to get to know more, because those can be kids who are those silent trauma kids, those anxious kids, the ones that just have a few other things going on that could be warning signs, right?
Hmm.
So attendance and performance, and where are they flying? Are they just kind of content to sit there at that middle round, or is there something else going on with
Yes, exactly. So, what is now we go to the emotional side, and I think emotional and behavior kind of go together um, because you see it in them.
them?
And as far as the 180, this is more behavior, but emotional too. Like I said, a student I had been helping in his class, fourth grader, super outgoing, friendly, happy, all over the place with his friends. And then one day there was nothing. Like he would just be sitting at his desk, not talking to anybody, not energetic.
Yeah,
And that to me was like the 180 that I was like, hey, what is going on? And come to find out, like he was talking about wanting to hurt himself. His parents were going through a divorce and he was split, between both and just that all those emotional feelings and he just didn't know what to do with it. And thankfully, I contacted the counselor, Carrie Manzo, and she contacted the parents. And of course, they had no idea how much it was really affecting their son. So they were able to, hopefully work that out as far as I know. But that was like the 180 for me when I saw the super energetic, happy kid to just sitting at his desk, not talking to anybody. What are some other signs that you see, Andrew?
Yeah, no, and that's a big one. Is just that flip. Um, so much of that can just give you an idea that it's kind of like the iceberg effect, like when we talk about like
Oh, yeah.
anxiety or just all the different turmoil that's happening underneath. Um, so there's a couple different parts. So what we call atypical affect, which is it's our fancy word in counseling psychology world of my emotion doesn't match my situation.
Mm.
So when we start seeing that mismatch, and generally with younger kids, that means I'm going to a 10 over a broken pencil,
Oh, right. Yeah.
right? So it's
Yeah.
that huge, like, yeah, that's going to be frustrating. I always hated that. Or sometimes I made that happen just so I didn't have to, I could like escape from the test a little bit. But when we see those
Yeah.
huge reactions in so many different ways and they're not typical, that shows us that stress level's high. And
Hmm.
that younger kids have by overgeneralization, but by rule they don't generalize their control of emotions or their stress very well. That's something they're still learning to, like,
Hmm.
you know so I would say that if you start seeing some more blow-ups, if you start seeing some more irritability, another thing to kind of clue you in on is sleep. Are
Mm.
they sleeping or not?
Right.
Trouble sleeping. um Are they sleeping too much? So that's a big one. With younger kids, we look at food too. So
Right.
some of those, and this is kind of that emotional control, that some of that behavior coming out. Are they
Hmm.
eating or are they not eating? And then bathrooming for younger kids or for elementary kids. Basically, when stress gets too high, if there's abuse, if there's neglect, if there's other things going on, usually they control what goes in and what comes out, and sometimes not in the best ways.
Right.
So those are a few areas. Um, my biggest one as a counselor, I always look at who's feeling helpless or
Mm.
hopeless, right? And so that speaks to me in a couple different ways of if you feel like you're hopeless, and that gives you so much right there to work with, and that
Right.
gets my like spidey sense going
Oh, yeah.
because um, Dr. Aaron Beck, one of the foremost person on cognitive behavioral theory.
Hmm.
Um, he was the one that has really studied depression and everything. We all take those surveys at the doctor's office where it's
Oh,
have you
yeah.
felt this way? Have you felt like there's no hope? Those are things.
Yes.
He found that hopelessness was the best predictor for somebody who has suicide ideation and suicide attempts. And
Mm.
so hopelessness is one big thing. If they feel like, or if they say some things like, I just, there's no options, there's no choices. I don't feel like I can do anything. I don't feel like anywhere to go. That's a big part
Mm.
for me. So
Yeah.
when we start seeing behaviors that show that, like, doesn't matter, I don't care anyway. That's
Yeah.
when we have those really big thoughts. And that's where I
Mm.
would say, get them to a counselor, get them to a mental health professional, get them to somebody who can help. They're
Right.
people.
Right.
Um, there's a program, question, persuade, refer. If you feel like that's something that you've seen a lot from your kiddos in the academic world or outside, because there's a lot of organizations that use it.
Mm.
That's a
Okay.
suicide response for anybody to be trained in, and there's a lot of them in the a lot of people that are in the community that have trained it or are trainers. That's something that a lot of just organizations offer. So question QPR, question, persuade, refer. But that's for that more serious hopelessness, possibly
Okay.
ideation of hurting yourself or talking about killing yourself, those kinds of very serious things. And there's always 988 for those parts. When we
Hmm.
start seeing the other affects where there's excessive worrying, um, there's even flat affect. They're it's not atypical. It's like an under emoting. That can give you
Hmm.
some signs too. Um, so it's like, normally this would be a 10, Bobby's gonna blow, and now it's like you can't even get anything out of them.
Yeah.
That shows you a disconnection, right?
Hmm.
And and usually like a dissociative effect. And that can speak to a lot of different things of I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm being I'm having some trauma responses, or I'm being currently in a trauma response, those kinds of things. So
Right.
so much of the affect can be shown through little emotion, too much emotion, or inappropriate
None.
emotion.
Or yeah. Yeah, and we just can't take anything for granted. No matter the age level of the student, no matter, if you think they're joking or not, like it needs to be addressed. And whether it's just asking sometimes even a couple more questions, I feel like that has been helpful. Um, and then realizing like, oh, okay. But I think the experience and knowing the students and this, the school culture and everything, like when somebody is like, no, they're in trouble. Like they need more than obviously just what I can say or give. They need the counselor who can send them in the right direction. So we kind of touched a little bit on that emotional, but there's also the social. And that's where, again, like you said, they can just shut down, or like the student I worked with, like didn't engage at all with any of his friends. What are some other social warning signs that we should be watching out for?
Yeah, the two really polarizing ones are like everybody's a friend, but you're not close to everybody. So
Mm,
you know a lot of people, a lot of acquaintances, but
right,
not necessarily have that. You could tell somebody about them in a deeper way, or there's no friends. There's the isolation factor. And
right.
so then we're talking about what are some boundary issues? Do I have too strong of a boundary for whatever reason?
Hmm.
Something's happening that I'm pushing people away. So I'm keeping these walls and these boundaries and this armor, however you want to kind of conceptualize it. Is that too strong because of certain things? Or I have no boundaries. And that in itself brings in problems, especially when you get older, when you have
Oh,
middle
yeah.
schoolers and high schoolers and things like that. And, those kinds of ages where no boundaries is going to get you in, leave you
Yeah,
at risk for a lot of
not
problems
good.
that
Right.
have some pretty far-reaching effects to them too. Um, and then the 180, do you suddenly lose friendships?
Mm.
Does it feel like there was a line in the sand and then one weekend everybody was over having like triple sleepovers? I mean, that was the thing when I was growing up anyway. It was like, hey, Friday through Sunday, I was over at a buddy's house or something. And then the next day, that's like, they're dead to me, don't ever speak their
Yeah.
name, and I spit that, if anybody ever mentions them. And that gives you some idea that there's been some big changes, or maybe they got oversaturated. There's too much time. They don't know how to deal with each other in a more long-term, meaningful way of like maintaining
Mm.
connections. And so that can give you a few ideas right there of just kind of where they're at. And this is all just getting a barometer.
Right.
The biggest
Right.
part is what you said is being able to open that communication line with kids, with your students, and just start going from there about what they're feeling, what they're hearing and saying.
Right, because I also feel like that could be a bullying situation as well. And then, of course, you hit, like you said, the older kids, and there's a breakup um, between boyfriend, girlfriend, and any other relationships like that, definitely devastate kids at that age. They think life is over and I'm never gonna survive this. That can definitely, I think, spiral into that hopelessness, back to the isolation, and now they don't want to be friends with anybody. Um, but I think some of that too is like happening, maybe not necessarily in the classroom, but that's where, it's a school, you're a team, everybody should be looking out for everybody. And that's for us as paraprofessionals. Yes, we work mostly with special education students, but if I seen a gen ed student over here, not behaving the normal that I've seen, like I'm going to give somebody a heads up about it. So I think that's the important too of that school culture and remembering like we are there for every student. Um, and I know, majority of the educators who listen here, they feel the same way. So let's hit on some behaviors. We kind of talked about that, like the 180s um, of behaviors. Um, Along with this, I think of some mental health issues. We had one student, and I think he was really having like a mental breakdown. He was in his classroom and telling his teacher, like he was looking up and saying, like he was seeing things on like around the room. And yeah, obviously that's a pretty big warning sign. Like this is not normal. And he wasn't a kid like just joking about like you knew like he was pretty serious about what was happening. So we definitely, got him into the office, into the counselor and parents and, they the other sad thing about that situation was he's like, I don't want to go back to the hospital. I don't want to go back.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, I'm sorry, buddy. Like, we just have to get you the help that you need. And he did end up going to the hospital. But as far as I know, like he was on medication, and I think they just modified what other medication he was on. But I mean, obviously, that's kind of an extreme. You don't really
Yeah.
see that situation. Um, it's not like I see dead people, but
That doesn't
he
happen too often. I mean,
no.
it does. I mean, but just not as often. I think one of the biggest parts is just are they grouchy, surly, are they tired? Kind of some things we already hit on.
You're
Um,
hungry, right?
yeah, and so I've worked with a lot of ADHD kids, and so being able to kind of decipher some of those things, rates of speech, you know,
Mm.
the blurting, things like that. When we have a kiddo who's been successfully medicated, and then
Uh-huh.
they miss a dose or something like that, or they run out, I mean, it can be kind of a night and day thing, between being able to kind of stop themselves from doing some blurting to just like flight of ideas and just whoo, they're going a mile a minute, right?
Yeah.
And oh, Mrs. B, did you know that we did this on the weekend and that was a really fun thing this weekend? You know what else we did on this weekend? We really
Yeah.
loved watching Wicked, and it's I love watching Wicked. Have you seen Wizard of Oz? Because it's kind of like Wicked, but where's it? And you
Yeah.
just hear this mile a minute, and there's just this sequence of logic that sometimes makes sense and sometimes it only makes sense to them. And that's important because, they at least know what they're talking about. So you
Right.
see some of those factors coming out, like what's their rate of speech? Are they talking? Are they having unusual pausing or slow things along those lines? Some of the appetite behaviors, are they hungry all the time?
Yeah.
Are they a food insecure family to begin with? Or
Right.
is that a change? Because that can tell you like maybe mom and dad had a change, maybe grandma and grandpa, maybe their placement, were
Mm-hmm.
they removed or did they jump placements with foster system? Things along
Yes.
those lines. Are they shifting between mom and dad or grandma, grandpa,
Mm-hmm.
whoever? And then that can tell you like how that's going, or some people that they just connect through food, so there's a lot of family and cultural values that center around meals and sharing things or not.
Right.
you know there's um there's festivals and different things like that that come up that can be points of talking about, but they also require, are they fasting? So are they hungry because of Ramadan and you're fasting
Mm.
during the sunlight hours?
Right.
Sometimes we know those things and sometimes we don't know. And so
Right.
that just brings up different ways that we can kind of support those kiddos so they can be successful at school, but also being culturally aware of where they're coming from and where they're living in. Because we get
Mhm.
them for 7 hours, they go somewhere else for 17,
Yeah.
right? And so we can have some formal time with them, but we also have to kind of work within their world. And I always like to recognize like they're pretty big experts in their own world. Even our kids, our Title I kids, where everybody's like, "Oh my God, it's got to be the hardest thing in the world." Like, these kids are amazing,
Mhm.
right? Have so much fun because they're so savvy in so many different ways. I've worked with a lot of GT kids, and they're, the high pressure and anxiety and the high production value that they are driven to is pretty
Right.
amazing. But how you support them can be different. So, but you also see the behavioral systems happen in different ways. Like, is there the anxiety for the perfectionism? Are they getting an analysis by paralysis kind of approach because they don't know where to start versus are they so hungry they can't really think of anything to
Hold
be able
on.
to start? And so those different little caveats to like maybe the same behavior. I'm not starting my assignment, but those are two different ways of supporting them.
Yes. I think of some of the students that I worked with, like you said, in the foster care system, and not to generalize, I guess, but those students that I worked with, food was definitely a big factor for them. And we always made sure, like, did you eat this morning? Do we need to go get a breakfast? And usually we could always grab a breakfast even though breakfast was over, or if they need an extra lunch or just seconds. We always tried to make sure that they always had some food so that it wasn't interfering with the academics. But yeah, they always had to have something to eat. It just
One of the
it
best
breaks your
things,
heart.
yeah, one of the best things I've ever seen is how happy a kiddo I worked with was for fresh fruit.
Mm.
So they would, and it happened to be that we figured out that she loved, I want to say it was oranges and pears, maybe bananas too. But I mean, she would do anything for those.
Wow.
Like it was the best motivator for her. And we would just give it, I mean, but once she got those, and it was like one day a week, our district was doing, I don't know, like a health and wellness thing. So they were delivering some of those things.
Oh yeah.
She did so much work and was just the happiest little gal.
Yeah.
Um, so it's sometimes surprising what our kids have access to, but
Mhm.
then again, that just gives us that more information about how we can support them, um, and go from there. But
Yes.
that fixation on that, there's always the at-risk behaviors. Are they into drugs and alcohol? Are they, having, there's drugs, alcohol, sex, those kinds of things that are really kind of hallmarks of at-risk behavior. Are they attention seeking? Are they, thrill seeking, things like that? But sometimes it's those smaller factors of like, what are they eating or what are they not eating? You know, are they communicating a lot or not enough? Some of those more subtle signs sometimes that give us the biggest insight to how these kids are working, living, and being.
Yes. And then I just want to take them all home. I mean,
Yeah,
they just need hugs and come home.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's go over some ways how can we help um, our students who may be struggling and going through some of these tough situations.
Yeah.
And let's start with emotional. You see a student, like you said, crying for 10 minutes over a broken pencil, and they are not consolable. So, what can we do to help these students who are struggling there?
That's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I struggle myself, and I've been doing this, been a counselor for 8 years now, and done lots of different trainings and everything. And sometimes the biggest part is just sitting and holding that space, and that can be the
Yeah.
hardest thing in the world. So just listening. What we always say is listening to hear and
Yes.
understand versus listening to solve. And that's the hardest, that's one of the hardest like shifts for education people is
Uh-huh.
because we want to hear like, oh, you broke your pencil. Let's get you a new pencil.
Yeah.
It's not about the pencil.
Right.
The pencil, it sucked that that happened, but that's a microcosm sometimes of what's happening overall. And so the way that we always teach to listen to hear is to just do some reflections.
Mm.
You the pencil broke, and it doesn't have to be a question because sometimes if you give a kid questions, they're like, "You're not even listening to me. You just keep asking questions." Like, "Come on, Smith. I'm done
Yeah.
talking to you. You just have questions." Like, okay, yeah, fair. So try and make it a statement of you're upset.
Yes.
That's a reflection. I'm reflecting the emotion. Or Mrs. B, you told me that you hated when your pencil breaks. You feel like this happens to you a lot,
Yeah.
right? We're reflecting the intent and kind of the context of things that are being communicated. And that can go a long way with somebody, we all been there when we're pretty upset and having somebody just kind of validate our existence and our gripes,
Right.
right? Whether they think it's appropriate, whether they think it's, legitimate or not, they're validating us. They know that we feel that, and that's the important part. Brene Brown, are you sitting in the hole with them, or you just kind of gazing at them and telling them, "Well, that sucks," and offering them a sandwich, right?
Right.
So that's a big part. Um, but then opening communication after that, being willing to connect after that, kind of going back to our bread and butter that we always talk about, is trying to connect after that, and that's sometimes not easy too. So investing time is a big part.
Yeah.
There's a couple different ways that people do that too, and that would be some people love to do minute interviews. So they sit there for a day even, or they spend 5 minutes every Friday with 1 minute for every kid, and they
Ah,
do minute interviews um, just to see what's going on. What's making you smile? What's making you sad? What's it like at home? What's it like here at school? Who's your best friend right now? Or something like that.
yeah.
Some people have some very, very scripted things that they go through, and some keep it general, like, hey, how's it going? And just leave that open. So, minute interviews or 2 by 10s. So, you spend 2 minutes with a person, completely just random things. You don't talk about like performance or anything like that. You just
Ah,
talk about a subject, like a would you rather. So would you rather have powers like Wonder Woman or would you rather have powers like Green Lantern? Right? And then you just talk about that for 2 minutes. And if you do that 10 times,
uh-huh.
then you've made a pretty solid connection with a kid.
Yeah.
And those are some pretty low intensive, as far as resources go, ways
Right.
to open those conversations and connect and give you those insights into how you can help kids and support kids and how to convince them that you're a trusted person to allow that
Mm.
too, because some of our kids know that they can ask for help, but accepting help from a trusted person can be a very tricky thing for some of our kids. So
That's
those are two pretty easy ways with no little to no resources other than time that you can invest.
right. Because
And then I'll
again, like you said, we're validating who they are, how they're feeling, letting them know that they're seen and they're heard. And for some kids, like that's all they need. That's all they need to know. Like you saw them, but they were upset and you took time to just connect. And sometimes I know like this could be in the middle of your lesson and you don't have time to like, let's sit down and talk. But I think also being able just to validate, like I can tell, you're upset, but I just don't have time to talk now. Can we do it, as soon as I finish the lesson or recess or whatever it is that works for your schedule? But just acknowledging can go a long ways for that student. Okay, so what are some ways we can help our students who are struggling academically. Like you see, maybe they're not showing up, or maybe they're not turning in assignments, and it's been like a month, and you've been trying to encourage and tell them what they need to do. What else can teachers do to support these students?
Well, that gets to be tricky, and that's where knowing your kids, for one thing, it really helps. What I usually say is let's prioritize. What do they need to be done? And let's be honest, what is busy work? I mean, sometimes it's busy work because they just need that little extra practice. Maybe they're not 100%, maybe they're I don't know, they're 88% on a subject. Like they've got it. They could use a little bit of tweaking, but
Yeah,
having them do another or having them fill out another sheet on it is probably not quite what they don't need the whole thing. They need just like a few more contacts with it, a few more problems here and there. So let's prioritize. What do we need to get done? What do they need? Where's their holes at for their knowledge? So getting a good feel for that. And then do we need that whole, 5-page paper, or could we just could we start breaking it down and chunking it a little bit?
right.
Can we make it a little bit easier to have some success and then build back up, right? Because most
Yeah,
of the time, what we're talking about is some 180s where something's happened, they're overwhelmed, they've gotten behind, and some things maybe are snowballing. So, what could we take off their plate?
right.
And where can we bend to meet them so that we can then get back up to speed and everybody can run together rather than, somebody trying to play catch up with the whole class?
Hmm.
Because that can save some time for you in the long run of not having to reteach it to two or three different kids when we teach everybody and then bend a little bit to bring them back up, right?
Right.
So in those situations, what's a priority for us? Do we need to get everything done, or can we show a few things and then kind of move back?
Right.
Can we build up their skills, or do they need a little extra, like an intervention, right? And so those are those different parts of sussing it out of what would be helpful. And then lots of different buildings have lots of different programs, whether it's the MTSS, right? The multi-tiered system of supports,
Mhm.
or your PBIS, your positive behavior intervention systems, depending on if behavior is getting in the way of academics or if academics is just lagging. Some are still on the old RTI system, the response to intervention system that had
Mm.
that three-tier system to it. Um,
Right.
so if it's truly that it feels like it's a little bit out of your wheelhouse to get them back up to speed, then those are those processes where the rest of the team can start wrapping around your kiddo. Not just the counselor for behavioral support or like family support with like either the counselor or social worker. Um, some schools have both and some have only one or the other, which is nice to at least have somebody, right? Can they wrap
Right.
around to help with some of those behavioral parts and those family support parts? Do they need further evaluation for different things? Every school has a system for that,
All
and so
right.
just kind of keeping them in the loop of, Johnny's struggling, came on all of a sudden, not entirely sure where they're at. I'm trying to figure that out. They're trying to work on it. And then
Hmm.
let's communicate home and bring in that part of the team too. Because if we're feeling it at school, there's a good chance that they're feeling or seeing something or something's happened at home, you know. So being able to communicate from there is pretty important.
Yes, because then that helps to take away that overwhelm
Yeah.
that that student, I'm sure, feels. They know they're behind, but they don't have the capability to try and figure out what I need to do first, and then it just it's that revolving, stress of I'm never going to be able to catch up, so why should I bother? So if you're able to get parents and other support in the school to help that student and modify any of his work, I think that is a great way to help that student through that time. So, what are some other ways we can help those students that are struggling socially? Um, Whether we find out maybe it's bullying, maybe it's, I don't know. How do we connect with them that way? I know what at our previous school, my previous school, our social worker would usually do get a group of kids together like once or twice a week and have those are all those social skills. And you want friends, well, how are you treating other people? And just getting those social skills together. What's another way that you think we can support these students?
Yeah. So being in touch with your social worker and your counselor, depending on who's in your building and kind of the deviation of everything, um, because they'll have some specific ones that they can work on or that they could attend.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of teachers have lunch bunches,
Yeah.
and so they'll bring in certain kiddos. What I liked to do as a counselor was kind of do a four corners activity. And so that's something that you use like a sentence prompt of I if go to this corner if you like chocolate ice cream, go to that
Mm.
corner if you like vanilla, hang out by my desk out over in the other corner if you like Rocky Road. And if you don't like any of those, or if you have kind of a wacky like Cheetos flavored ice cream, I don't know, that used to be a thing at one point. Go over by that one corner and then that gives kids like a non-pressured way of noticing who has a similar like, who
Mm.
is interested in some similar things. Because
Right.
similarity breeds attraction and proximity. Generally you're in proximity with some people with for certain things like schools. You're all in the same neighborhood usually, right? Unless you go to a private school. So then that's proximity. That gives you that common connection, that proximity that you're somewhere in the Smith Elementary grounds that then you can start connecting, right? It also gives you a topic of like, hey, I saw that you like chocolate ice cream. Is that a big deal? Or like, are you an ice cream fan or are you just more of a chocolate fan? Or something like that.
Right.
It also gives kids a non-pressured thing of like, I don't like any of those things, but I want to go be around other kids. So who's gonna call you out on that? Like, you don't really like chocolate, like nobody does that. They're all excited, like, yeah, chocolate's the best.
Right.
So it gives kind of a couple different ways of kids being able to make a connection that way. So if they're feeling like they're isolated or they're not making connections, that's one activity. That's a really quick one you could do. There's all sorts of prompts if you give them a Google. There's different ways of playing that game or the
Uh-huh.
mind game. Um, and I usually tell kids, I don't want you really talking a lot. And then that means that the kids are going to talk a bunch. But then I
Of
always heavily
course.
emphasize, okay, go talk about this some other time, like at recess. And they're like, we're already talking about it. And so it kind of forces that connection because they don't want to listen to Smith. They just want to talk.
Yeah.
Um,
Amongst themselves. Yeah.
yeah, pretty much. And
Mm.
so it's like, don't do that. And, don't think about that purple elephant. They're like, oh, we're going to think about the purple elephant. You can't tell me what to do. Um, maybe it's just me that has those reactions. I don't know. But usually it was a great, great way of doing that. For boundaries, so that'd be like if you just need some help, like creating some common connections or common topics to talk about. Boundaries, I would recommend a one-on-one kind of approach, and generally I would say let's have a counselor start working on that because that can be for so many different reasons. But
Right.
usually there's a lot of curriculums that'll talk about it being passive aggressive or assertive. So
Mhm.
they'll kind of talk about those three ways. And there's one, Sanford Harmony has a whole SEL program. And one of the lessons in there is really good about passive aggressive and assertive and how you can do that through communication as well.
Oh, that's
So
good.
your aggressive communication, are you in somebody's face? Are you passive and you just letting somebody walk all over you?
Mm.
Or are you
Mhm.
being assertive and you're holding your boundary and you're not letting somebody walk over your boundary, but you're not also crossing their boundary? And so there's some different ways of doing that. You have to do the whole program for Sanford Harmony, but there's a ton of like teacher pay teacher or other homegrown things if you want to search those out. But those generally they kind of fall on those different things, and that gives that empowerment of like you can say no and be assertive in a healthy way without letting somebody walk over you. Um, And then there are times where you got to talk to them about, no, you need to be a little bit more aggressive in when somebody is crossing your boundaries. And so that empowerment part of like,
Hmm.
if you call somebody, if you start cussing them out and calling them names, that's on you. But if you get loud and you're more aggressive in holding your boundaries, that's okay. And there's certain situations and scenarios that you can teach of like somebody is being racist towards you. Somebody is purposefully, misnaming you or dead naming you or things like that. Or there's just times when somebody's just being flat out rude to you, right? A little bit, if you've warned them once, you don't have to sit here and be
Right.
that passive turtle of like, please stop doing that. Please stop doing that. But I don't like that. Those are good messages, but at a certain point, if you say it 5 times,
Yeah.
it's not having an effect. Then having a little more empowerment about, I always tell kids, get loud. It's like if you're not calling them, stinky foot or a jerk or something like that, then you're not going to be in trouble.
Right.
When you get loud though in school situations, people tend to like tune in because it's kind of like the being loud at the library. It's like you
Yeah.
shouldn't be loud. Only the teacher's allowed to be loud, right? And so it gets other people's attention. And that way you are a little bit more aggressive in that, but it's in an empowering way to hold your boundaries. And so having some scenarios to practice that and role playing is really helpful for a lot of kids, especially our anxious kids who don't quite know how to respond to certain situations. Um, but it's worrying them enough that there's a problem. So those are some pretty low key ways, as
Hmm.
far as like not having a lot of resources, not having a huge time suck on them, but
Right.
being able to support our kids with some different boundaries socially and
Yes.
just some social situations.
Yeah, those are totally doable. And now what about helping those students that are struggling with their behaviors who may have never been aggressive before and now all of a sudden they're being aggressive towards peers? Um, or I mean, it could be the same. Now they're wanting to sleep all the time, or seeing that excessive talking and different ways that they're disrupting, interrupting, being rude, all those other things. Because obviously we have students that are just disrespectful or they just want to be disruptive. Like that's not a huge warning sign per se of something maybe a little bit more. So we're talking, of course, the behaviors that could be a result of some other issues going on. So how can we help those students?
But there's a couple different ways. So I usually try and sit side by side with them if I can.
Mm,
And then we just start talking and then try and chat them up, right? Some ways to do that if you don't have a huge connection with them is to make an
mm,
observation and let it sit and then pair it with silence, right? You had that was a pretty big explosion about a pencil. You must have been feeling really out of control at that point, or that seems to have really affected you. We
right.
make that observation, that reflection of what happened, right? And then just let it sit. A lot of people, when you give them an opening to talk about those things, they want to fill that, they want to explain their side, and that's okay,
Mm,
right? That gives you an opportunity to reflect and validate and things like that, and praise even. Like, wow, you just told me a whole lot, and that must have been, it takes a lot of a lot of courage.
right.
You're pretty brave to tell me because you don't know me that well. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Hmm.
And that opens that up. If it's a kiddo that you have a good connection with, then ask the question of um, what happened. So that was you know, Mrs. B, you really had a big reaction to breaking that pencil. Wondering what happened. But you want to make sure that you frame it in a non-judgmental or confrontational way. Because if you just had this huge explosion of about this pencil, it's not really about the pencil, but it, that seems to be kind of what the result was, and you're like, what were you doing? What
Yeah.
makes you think you can do that?
Not
Wow,
helpful.
that was just, I can't believe you would do that to my room. We're going to shut down some things more than it's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
So just being like, wow, I wonder what were you feeling when that happened?
Yeah.
And so then that just opens that conversation up. Um, but that also is if you've laid the groundwork, if you've done the investing and things like that, then I would go from there. But otherwise, if you don't even know, and if you're not comfortable, sometimes my style is just being pretty blunt of like, wow, that was weird. I don't know. You haven't had a response like that in a while, huh? Okay, well, do you need something? And then we go from there, right? And
Yeah.
that's just me being my awkward, like old dude ways. Um, but if you don't even feel like you can ask those questions, that's fine. Just sit with a kid.
Yeah.
Just sit and say, hey, I'd like to sit with you. How about we draw?
Yeah.
And just do a shared activity and or a parallel activity. And
Yeah.
that so when there's I'm speaking more elementary here, but when you're having kids who are younger, who are having a hard time regulating, whether it's a new thing, like an acute thing that just happened, or a long-term thing, a lot of social referencing happens and modeling, and that's where that social learning happens. And so being able to sit after a big explosion and say, well, let's catch our breath. I'm going to draw while I catch my breath.
Yeah.
And then that demonstrates a healthy coping skill that you don't have to teach. They know from watching you that it's okay to have that behavior. We're going to bounce back. There might be some consequences of like having to pick things up,
Right.
maybe repairing a relationship with like a sorry or, restorative justice, depending on how old they are and those things. But sitting with them and just giving that investment in time is another way of handling those kinds of behaviors and being able to start opening that communication with them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so important right there, like you said, is you're coming with that calm voice. You're not, like you said, screaming at them or yelling at them, like, I can't believe you did that. You just calmly, and even your body is calm. You're not coming at them, like, what in the world? You're just calm. You sit next to them, or you just say, okay, I'll give you a minute. Some students I've told, I don't want to talk right now. Okay, that's fine. I'm just going to be over here doing whatever's, like you said, drawing, I don't know, whatever it is. And then usually that student will come over and sometimes they don't even bring it up. Other times they will start talking about it. But obviously if they were hurting somebody, then we do want to address that situation. But
Yeah, if they
again,
get
we're not
aggressive
being
towards,
judgmental. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, if they get aggressive towards you or somebody else, then there are things that we gotta kind of keep in mind, and that's not just their safety. It's for the safety of yourself and others, as well as protecting their dignity too. And so that's where some of the other things, or right response or man training or things like that, or your behavior plans, your BIPs, that come into play. And so that's when those things happen. But when we're talking about that, there was a big thing that, yeah, maybe that they're having this big explosion on these things, but they're relatively safe, then absolutely we connect, right? And we wait out. I forget where I've seen this, and I've had this training before, but um, it was a training for kiddos with trauma as well as just having those explosive behaviors. And one of the biggest and most useful things was using a target, like a dartboard, target board kind of a
Mhm.
deal, and just asking them like, "Hey, we'll have to talk about what happened. It doesn't have to be right now." And so I would even, all of our tables are like they're basically dry erase boards.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what I
Yeah.
would do is I'd just go grab a dry erase marker and working in elementary, it's like the kids are like, "Oh my God, you're
Right.
writing on it." So that's enough
Table.
sometimes to jog them out. They're
Yeah.
like, "How dare you write on the table?" I'm like, "It's my table." Like,
Yeah.
trust me, that's the custodian's least beef with me, right? Is
Right.
drawing on the table and not like all the crumbs and everything that happened. I was like, I draw like a three target thing. Like in the middle is like We're gonna talk about it right now.
Mm,
That next one is okay, in 5 minutes
mm,
or 5 hours. And for some kids, it might be, you know, right now, later today or this afternoon or
mm,
tomorrow morning.
mm-hmm.
And that's knowing your kids. But it gives them the ability to know, like, that was big enough. We got to address it. It
Right.
doesn't have to be right now. And addressing it also means, like, I'm not going to like lower the boom or drop a hammer on you. We're just going to talk about what happened so it doesn't happen again. Right.
Yeah.
You made a mistake. I maybe made a mistake in handling it. Let's figure out how we can have something, we can take a look at what didn't go right or what went wrong and make sure that some things go more right next time. And so being able to have that kind of that those choices within that bubble or it's within their sandbox. You're making the sandbox. They get to play with what they want or choose within the sandbox, but we know that it's going to happen at some point because that's how we grow.
Right. Yes. And then that also goes back to, like you said, giving them a voice and a choice. So you're reiterating, like, we still need to talk about this, but now it's going to be up to them to decide when and when they're ready. And we use that a lot too with our students, like, let me know when you're ready,
Yeah.
because obviously we're not going to we can't force anybody to talk or, to go over, to process through. If somebody comes up to us and like, no, you need to sit down, like, I want to talk to you right now about this, like, this needed to, maybe you could make it happen, but for the most part, nobody likes that. So again, you're kind of validating, who they are and their feelings, and then giving them that voice and that choice to determine, okay, like, we still have to deal with this, but it's okay to deal with it at your time. I think that speaks volumes as well. All right, there is a ton of amazing information in here, lots of great strategies, because we know students are still struggling, students are hurting, and we need to be aware that so that we can come in and help them or lead them to the right people to help them. And so thank you, Andrew, for your time again, for all of the great strategies and information. I will get those in the show notes. And do you have any parting words of wisdom for us, Andrew?
No, well, I'm gonna have to throw out my new trademark line is connection is the best prevention, right?
Yes.
Um, I think I
Yeah,
said that right.
trademark it.
So I'm gonna workshop it a little bit. Um, so I just want to throw out like starting having conversations, just open up conversations in your classroom. And there's a lot of we were kind of messing around before the podcast, looking through some different ones. So there's a ton of conversation starters on Amazon.
Oh, right.
There's
Yeah.
lots of different cue cards and stuff like that. And if you're listening at home or if you're looking for, the family dinner project is one big part, and that so having conversations around dinner or meals is a pretty natural thing for a lot of families to do. Whether you all sit down at once and have like the traditional family dinner, or if you're just sitting down here and there, um, being a little bit targeted about just opening up conversations rather than just being like, "Well, how's your day?" Right? Like, "Oh, it was okay."
Yeah.
Right? Fine. But, I don't know. I did all right. I survived. Those kinds of
Good.
things, right?
My kids were always good. It was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We learned some stuff, right? What'd you learn? I don't know, some stuff. Math,
Yeah.
right? It gives you if you go to Family Dinner Project, and we'll put a little thing, it's a free resource from I think it was Massachusetts General Hospital, their area of psychiatry of just being able to like connect over a meal. But there's a ton out there. That's just one. There's a ton of just sentence starters. Really kind of start asking some specific questions. One thing we use in my family is what's what was your biggest smile for today? Or what's the best thing that you got from this last we're in the Midwest, so we've had like a week off. What was your favorite part about staying
Yeah.
home this week? Right. Well, they got to watch a lot of movies like and Wizard of Oz and Wicked apparently are kind of right on my kids' radar right now. So they would say that. And, what was something that frustrated you? And so it gets more specific. And that's just that groundwork of that connection, maintaining those things, because even though they're your kids, they're your own kids, whether kids that you get a love on for 7 hours a day until they go home, we still got to maintain those things, and being able to open up those conversations is a big part. So, um, lay those foundations. Use one of the things from Amazon, use one of the natural resources, but start doing that prevention, right?
Exactly. Perfect. So, I want to encourage you who are listening. What conversation are you going to start? What student can you think of, as we've been talking about it, that you now can say, okay, this may be a warning sign? So, really, again, connect with your students, see how they're doing, and get them the help that they need. You guys are amazing, and your students need you. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.